The fire that remembered its maker. Corvin did not ask to be chosen. He was standing behind a pillar, holding a bucket, when Councillor Hess pointed at him and said, "That one." Nobody laughed out loud. They were too important for that, but they made the face, the tight, amused mouth, the glance sideways at someone beside them. The face that means, this is a joke and the joke is him. The hatchling they handed him was grey, not the silver grey that dragon scholars wrote poems about. Grey like wet stone, grey like something that had never been warm. It was the size of a large cat, and it lay in the transport basket with its eyes closed and its breathing uneven, each inhale a little too slow, each exhale a little too short. "It won't last the month," one of the attendants murmured. He was talking to the woman beside him, not to Corvin. Corvin heard it anyway. He had come to the bonding hall because Hess had sent for a stable hand to clean the floor after the ceremony. The actual bonding was for riders, people with names the city remembered, people whose fathers had flown dragons and whose grandfathers had written the treaties that kept Drenmore standing. Corvin's father had cleaned fish at the South Dock until his back gave out. His brother Brennan had joined the garrison because it paid more than fish. Corvin was 17 and owned one pair of boots. He carried the basket back to the lower stables with both hands because the latch was broken and he did not want the hatchling to fall. The other stable hands watched him come through the door. One of them asked what he was carrying. Corvin said he didn't know yet. The honest answer was something that was going to die and the task of watching it happen. He cleared out the cleanest stall he had, laid fresh hay, set the basket down and opened it and looked at the hatchling for a long time. It was not beautiful. Its scales had no shine. Its claws were too large for its feet, which gave it an unfinished look, like something that had been assembled in a hurry and not checked. One of its nostrils had a small crack along the edge, not a wound, just a flaw, the kind that happened in weak clutches when the eggs sat too cold. Corvin sat down on the hay beside the basket. He did not have a plan. He was not thinking about destiny or greatness or the fact that every bonded rider in the hall tonight had a dragon that roared when it breathed and lit the ceiling with gold and crimson. He was thinking that the thing in the basket was alive, barely, and that alive things deserved someone nearby. He fell asleep against the stall wall sometime before midnight. When he woke up, the hatchling had moved. It had crawled to the edge of the basket and was lying with its chin on the rim, looking at him, not blinking, not moving, just looking, with eyes that were pale grey and steadier than anything Corvin had ever seen in a creature that small. He looked back. After a while he said, quietly, "I'm not much either." The hatchling did not respond, but it stayed where it was, watching him, until the morning light came through the stable slats and the other horses began to shift and stamp, and the day started without ceremony, which was the only way Corvin's days ever started. He named the hatchling Soot, not because it sounded strong, because it was the color of what was left after the fire was gone, and Corvin had always thought there was something honest about ash. It didn't pretend to be the flame, it just stayed. He told Brennan about it in a letter 2 weeks later. Brennan wrote back from the northern garrison with his usual blunt handwriting, "Don't name the sick ones, you'll only feel it worse when they go." Corvin read the letter twice, folded it, put it in his coat pocket, and went to check on Soot. Soot was eating, not much, but eating. Councillor Hess passed through the lower stables once that month to inspect the horse inventory. He saw Soot in the corner stall and paused. The grey hatchling looked back at him with those flat, steady eyes. "Still breathing," Hess said. "Yes," Corvin said. Hess made the face again, the tight, amused one, and walked on. He had already written the bonding off in his ledger as failed. One grayscale hatchling, unfit for service, assigned to stable auxiliary. Cost, negligible. Outcome, pending disposal. He did not write Corvin's name in the ledger at all. That night Corvin sat with Soot again and thought about that, about being so small that the people above you didn't bother to document your failure, because your failure wasn't even interesting enough to record. He thought about his father's back, about Brennan sleeping in a garrison bunk at the edge of a border nobody in the capital cared about. about the way the bonded riders had looked in the hall, all firelight and ceremony, belonging to something. He looked at Soot. Soot looked back. "All right," Corvin said, not to the hatchling, to the stall, to the night, to whatever was listening. "All right, we start tomorrow." Nobody heard him say it. Nobody wrote it down. It was just a stable boy talking to a sick dragon in the dark, and outside, Drenmore went on being a city that had no idea either of them existed. That was fine. For now, that was fine. Orvin came to the stable on a Tuesday with a stack of old books tied together with twine and a look on her face, like she had already decided she was wasting her time. She was 70-something and had spent 30 years as a clutch tender before the bonded riding tradition made clutch tenders useless. She smelled like dried herbs and something smoky, and she walked with a cane she did not lean on so much as carry as a threat. Someone in the city had told her about the grey hatchling. She said she had come to see if it was what she thought it was. She looked at Soot for a long time. Soot looked back at her. "Grayscale," she said. "I know," Corvin said. "Most people think grayscales are defective." She set the books down on the stall railing. "They're not defective, they're just not made for the ceremony. They don't bond because someone rings a bell. They don't follow commands, they choose, and they take a long time to choose." She looked at Corvin. "How long have you had him?" 7 months. "And he's still here?" "Yes." She handed him the books. "Read these, not the chapters on fire training. Those don't apply. Read the old sections on grayscale behavior, the ones the academies stopped teaching because grayscales stopped showing up in clutches, which happened right around the time people started managing clutches instead of leaving them alone." She picked up her cane. "I'll come back next week." She did, and the week after. For almost a year she came every Tuesday and told Corvin what he was doing wrong in a way that was so direct it barely hurt. She told him to stop giving Soot commands. She told him to stop using the hand signals the training manuals described. She told him to stop trying to get Soot to breathe fire on schedule and instead let the fire glands develop in their own time, because grayscales built hotter and slower, and if you rushed the glands, you could scar them permanently. Corvin stopped doing all of it. He started instead just being in the stall, working nearby, talking, not instructions, not training words. He talked about whatever was in his head. The broken hinge on the south stable door, a letter from Brennan, who had been promoted to sergeant and wrote about it in the same flat tone. He wrote everything like he was reporting weather. The vendor at the east gate who sold fried bread on cold mornings and always put in too much oil, and it was always worth it anyway. Soot listened. Corvin didn't know if listening was the right word for what a dragon did when it watched you with its full attention and didn't look away, but it was the closest word he had. In the second year, Soot started following him, not because Corvin called him. He would finish whatever he had been doing lying in the corner, watching the pigeons in the stable rafters, investigating a crack in the wall with the focused interest he gave everything, and then he would simply get up and walk after Corvin, through the yard, down the feed corridor, to the water trough, wherever he just came. The other stable hands thought it was strange. One of them said it looked like the dragon was raising Corvin, not the other way around. Corvin thought about that for a while and decided he didn't mind. The fire came in Soot's third year, and it was nothing like what the bonding hall dragons did. No burst, no roar, no dramatic column of flame. Soot sat very still one evening, looked at the far wall of the stall, and breathed out a long, thin, completely controlled stream of fire that lasted about 4 seconds and left a black line on the stone as clean as if it had been drawn with a tool. Then he stopped and looked at Corvin. Corvin stared at the line on the wall, then at Soot, then at the line again. "That's something," he said. Soot blinked and went back to watching the pigeons. Orvin saw it the following Tuesday and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Hot, hotter than it should be at his age." She tapped the black line with one finger. This wasn't a blast, it was a cut. He chose the shape of it. In the third year, Soot flew. The first time was awkward, too much wing angle on the left, a wobble at the lift point that made Corvin's stomach drop. But he got into the air, and he stayed there, and he circled the exercise yard twice with a steadiness that did not match how new he was to it. When he landed, he looked at Corvin with the expression Corvin had come to read as, "Well, I've considered this, and it seems acceptable." Veldra saw them in the exercise yard once. She was riding Verath, her crimson, already enormous, already terrifying, and she pulled up at the yard's edge and watched Soot land. She did not say anything. She rode away. Orvin died the following winter, quietly in her house, in her sleep. She left the twine-bound books with a neighbor with a note that said they were for the stable boy with the grey dragon. Corvin read the note 3 times. He went back to the stall and sat with Soot for the rest of the evening without talking, which was different from their usual silence because it had a weight to it, and Soot seemed to understand the difference. He lay down close enough that his side was warm against Corvin's leg, and stayed there until it was dark. That was its own kind of language. Corvin was learning to speak it. The last letter from Brennan arrived on a grey morning in late autumn. It was shorter than usual. He wrote that his unit was being moved north to the Thornwall passes. He wrote that the pay was better there. He wrote, "Don't worry." He had never once told Corvin not to worry before, which was the thing that made Corvin read the letter 4 times and then fold it very carefully and put it not in his coat pocket, but in the small box under his bunk, where he kept things he did not want to lose. 6 weeks later, a soldier came to the stable looking for anyone who knew a Sergeant Brennan of the 3rd Garrison. Corvin was the only one who raised his hand. The soldier's face did the thing faces did when the news they carried was that kind of news, and Corvin knew before a single word was spoken. He went to Councillor Hess the next morning and applied for military assignment as a bonded rider. He had prepared what to say. He had the 4 years of records he had kept himself, Soot's growth, his flight hours, his fire control. He had the statement Orvin had written 2 years ago attesting to Soot's capability. He set it all on Hess's desk. Hess looked at the papers, then at Corvin. Then he said the assignment roster was closed, that Soot was not on the official registry, and that sending an unregistered dragon into a military zone was illegal under Article 12 of the Rider Accords. He said it with the practiced patience of a man who had said similar things to many people and had never once had to feel the weight of what he was saying. Corvin picked up his papers and left. He went back to the stable, packed what he needed in 2 saddlebags, saddled nothing because Soot did not use a saddle and had never permitted one, and told Soot in plain words where they were going and why. He did not make it a speech. He said, "Brennan is dead. I need to see it for myself, and I think there's more dying coming that we might be able to stop." He paused. "You don't have to come." Soot stood up and walked to the stable door and waited. They flew north through the night. The Thornwall was 4 days at Soot's speed, which surprised Corvin. In the past year, Soot had become faster than he looked, with none of the showy power of the Crimson breeds, but a long, efficient stroke that ate distance without drama. They arrived at the edge of the Thornwall passes on the morning of the 4th day and saw the smoke first, then the ruins. 2 outposts, both gone, the stone walls still standing in places, but the inside of everything burnt to nothing. The smell was the kind that got into your clothes and stayed. A surviving soldier sat against a broken wall, one arm wrapped in cloth that had bled through. He told Corvin what happened. He called it Greyfir, the soldier's name for the ancient rogue that the warlord clans had pointed at the passes like a weapon. It had come at night. It did not fight the way the bonded breeds fought. It didn't breathe and retreat, breathe and retreat. It burned steadily, like someone who had all the time in the world, and it kept burning until there was nothing left to burn, and then it moved to the next position. The soldier looked at Soot. "That's not a military dragon," he said. "No," Corvin said. "Then what are you doing here?" Corvin did not have a clean answer, so he gave the only one he had. "I'm looking for where it went." Soot was already looking north. His nose was up, and he had the still, focused quality he got when he was taking in information, the same look he used to give the crack in the stable wall when he was a hatchling, like he was reading something written in a language nobody else could see. He had been tracking since they landed. Corvin knew this without asking, the way you knew things about someone you had spent 4 years learning. The official rider unit arrived that afternoon. Veldra was at the front, Verath's crimson scales bright against the grey sky, the rest of the formation tight behind her. She pulled up at the edge of the ruin and saw Corvin standing there with Soot. Her expression moved through several things quickly. She settled on controlled. "You have no clearance to be in a military zone," she said. "I know," Corvin said. "Do you know where the rogue went?" "Our scouts are working on it. Soot's been tracking it for 2 hours." She looked at the grey dragon. Soot did not look back at her. He was still looking north, reading whatever it was he was reading in the wind and the scorched air. Veldra's jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, Corvin thought, with something else, the look of someone who had just realized a question they did not know how to ask. That night Corvin sat at the edge of the ruins and thought about Brennan, not the way grief usually came, not in a wave, in small, specific things. The handwriting on the letters, always slightly slanted to the right. The way he said, "Don't worry," for the first time in 20 years of knowing each other and meant it as a goodbye. The box under the bunk. He did not cry. He sat very still and let it move through him like weather, and Soot lay beside him in the dark, warm and solid and real. And in that moment, the grey dragon, who was not on any official list, who had no rank and no registry number and no place in the system that had let Brennan die. That dragon was the only certain thing in the whole burnt world. "We're not going home," Corvin said quietly. Soot breathed out once, slow and even, and the small line of fire lit the dark for just a moment before it was gone. Soot moved at dawn without being told. He simply stood, looked north the way he had been looking all night, and walked to the open ground beyond the ruin. Corvin climbed onto his back, no saddle, no harness, just his knees against the base of the neck, the way he had learned to sit over 100 hours of flight, and Soot went up. The rider unit scrambled. Veldra got Verath airborne in under a minute, which was fast, and the rest of the formation followed. Nobody had ordered a pursuit, but nobody had ordered Soot either, and he was already ahead of them, flying low along the pass with his nose angled slightly down, reading the ground below like a page. Corvin did not direct him. This was the part that the rider training manuals had no chapter for, the part where you trusted the creature beneath you completely and let go of the need to be the one deciding. He had learned this slowly, badly, over years, and he still felt the pull to do something, say something, signal something. He kept his hands still and his weight balanced, and he let Soot lead. They found Grafer 3 hours into the pass, in a wide canyon where the walls were black from old burns that predated this war by decades. The ancient rogue was resting coiled against the north wall, enormous in a way that had nothing to do with the bonded breeds. Grafer was not large the way Verath was large, all muscle and wing breadth. It was large the way old mountains were large, dense, still, the kind of size that came from centuries of simply continuing to exist. The warlord command tent was at the canyon mouth, a quarter-mile back from the dragon, small figures moving around it, signal fires. The mechanism by which they had been feeding Grafer a direction, not commands, the surviving soldier had explained, but something older, a rage-feeding method that amplified whatever the ancient dragon was already feeling and pointed it. The rider unit fanned out behind Corvin and Soot. Veldra pulled up alongside and said nothing for a moment. Then, "It's going to turn when it detects us. Verath will draw first fire. The formation hits the flanks." Soot banked left. Not at Greyfire, away from it. Wide and low, curving back along the canyon wall toward the mouth, toward the command tent, away from the ancient dragon and away from the formation and away from everything that looked like the obvious move. Corvin understood immediately. He had spent 4 years learning to read what Soot understood before he understood it himself, and he felt it click into place the way it always did. Not a strategy, not a plan, just the clearest possible look at the thing that was actually true. Grafer wasn't the weapon. Grafer was the arrow. The tent was the bow. Veldra shouted something behind them. He couldn't hear it. Soot came in low over the canyon mouth, below the sightlines of the warlord scouts, at an angle that put the command tent between him and the canyon wall so that when he breathed, the fire would not carry into the pass. Corvin pressed his knees in, the signal they had worked out years ago, that meant I see what you're doing, keep going, and Soot leveled out 10 feet off the ground and breathed. It was the long, controlled, deliberate stream, not explosive, not a roar and burst the way the bonded Reds did it, a precise line of fire, held and shaped, that took the command tent from one end to the other in 4 seconds and was done, clean, surgical. The signal fires went with it. The mechanism went with it. The rage feed cut off like a lamp blown out. In the canyon, Greyfur stopped. The ancient dragon lifted its head. It looked around the pass with the slow attention of something that has just realized it has been running and can no longer remember why. Then it turned north and walked, not flew, walked into the deep mountains and was gone. The battle ended without a killing blow. The official report that Drenmore received 3 weeks later credited the Rider Unit, 1st Formation, with disrupting the warlord operation at Thornwall Pass. Corvin and Soot appeared in a footnote as unregistered auxiliary. The footnote was 4 lines. Hess received the report, read the main summary, and filed it. But a young scribe named Poller had been on the ridge with ink and paper. She had written down everything she saw, including which dragon identified the command structure and which rider gave no order because none was needed. Her account moved the way true things move, first among the soldiers who had been there, then along the roads, then into the city markets and the taverns, and eventually the kind of letter that gets copied and passed hand to hand until the original is long gone, but the words are everywhere. People started using the name, not the grey one or the unregistered or the stable dragon. They said Soot. They said it with the specific weight that names earn when they are attached to something real. Veldra found Corvin in the lower stable the night they returned to Drenmore. She stood at the stall door and looked at Soot for a long time. Then she said, "How did you train him to read a battlefield like that?" "I didn't," Corvin said. "Then what did you do?" He thought about the hay stall, about sitting in the dark beside something sick and small because there was nothing else to do, about 4 years of existing together without a plan, about Orvin saying, "You didn't train a dragon, you made a friend." "I stayed," he said. Veldra stood in the doorway for another moment. Then she sat down on the hay bale outside the stall, which was the most undignified thing he had ever seen her do, and she did not say anything else for a while. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that. 3 stone tablets fell from the sky over Drenmore on a windless morning, and when they hit the courtyard, the sound was not a crash. It was a crack, sharp and final, like something old breaking its silence on purpose. Each tablet was the size of a door. Each one bore the same marks, burnt into the stone rather than carved, in a script that only 3 scholars in the city could read. The scholars were brought to the council chamber, and they stood before the tablets for a long time before anyone spoke. Then the oldest of them turned to the council table and said carefully that the message was from the Ash Lords. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when the name of something genuinely ancient enters them. The Ash Lords were not part of any treaty. They were not part of any record more recent than 300 years old. They were 7 dragons who had been alive when the Keldrath Mountains were different shapes, who had watched the bonding tradition begin from a distance with the cold attention of things that had opinions but had not yet decided to act on them. Apparently, they had decided. The message said this: the bonding of dragons to human riders was an abomination. A dragon that submitted to a human collar was a dragon diminished. The Ash Lords had watched the tradition spread and had waited for it to end on its own. It had not ended. They were giving Drenmore 1 month to dissolve all bonds, release or put down all bonded dragons, and accept that humans were not made to fly. If the city did not comply, the Ash Lords would come and do it themselves. Greyfire, the tablets noted, had not been a rogue. It had been a test. Council argued for 3 days. Councillor Hess advocated for compliance. 7 ancient dragons against Drenmore's rider force was not a war, it was a conclusion. 2 council members wanted to fight and said so with the particular bravery of people who would not personally be in the air. Veldra sat in the back of the chamber and said nothing until the 3rd day, when she stood up and said the council was asking the wrong question. The question was not whether they could win a war against the Ash Lords. The question was whether the premise of the Ash Lords was right. She sat back down. Nobody knew what to do with that. Corvin was not at the council. He was in the stable. He told Soot what the tablets said. He did not simplify it. He said, "The oldest dragons in the world think a bond like ours makes you less. They think I put a collar on you. They are coming to end it unless we end it first." Soot listened. He was 6 years old now, which was young for a dragon and old for everything else, and he had the quality he had always had, the absolute attention, the steadiness, the sense of something thinking at a depth that didn't need to be loud about itself. His scales had changed over the years. Not color, still gray, still ash-toned, but texture. There was a faint iridescence in certain light, like oil on dark water. His fire glands had finished developing in the 5th year, and what they produced burned slower and hotter than anything the bonded reds could manage. He was not the biggest dragon Corvin had ever seen. He was, in every way that mattered, the most complete one. After a long silence, Soot did something he had never done before. He pressed his nose against Corvin's shoulder. Not a nudge held it there. A deliberate contact, steady and warm. Then he pulled back and looked at Corvin the way he had looked at him in the dark of the hay stall on the very first night 6 years ago. The same eyes, the same steadiness, the same quality of something that had chosen, fully and without ceremony, to be exactly where it was. Corvin went to the council the next morning with a proposal. He was not a councillor. He was not a first-rank rider. He was still, technically, listed in Hess's ledger as stable auxiliary with an unregistered dragon. The formal registration had never been completed despite Hess's offer. He stood up in the chamber anyway and said he wanted to go to the Ash Lord's mountain, not with a rider unit, not with weapons, alone with Soot, to say something to them that had not been said before. The chamber erupted. Hess said it was suicide. 3 councillors spoke at once. Veldra cut through all of it by asking a single question: "Does Soot agree?" Corvin said yes. She looked at the door, though Soot was not in the room. Some understanding moved across her face that she did not put into words. She turned back to the chamber and said, "Then I'm flying cover." That ended the argument, because Veldra ending arguments was something Drenmore had learned not to fight. They prepared for 3 days. Corvin spent them in the stable, not training, not planning, just existing in the same space as Soot the way he always had. On the last evening, a young soldier came to the stable door and stood there for a moment before speaking. He said he had been at Thornwall. He said he wanted Corvin to know that Brennan, Sergeant Brennan of the 3rd Garrison, had held the southern corridor for 6 hours the night Greyfair hit, and because of that, 11 men had gotten out who would not have otherwise. He said it mattered that someone knew. Corvin thanked him. The soldier left. Corvin sat down in the hay. Soot lay down beside him, close, and made the sound, the low, steady one that meant something like "I know," something like "I'm here," something like whatever language was older than words between 2 things that had chosen each other in the dark and never stopped. In the morning, they flew north to the place the old maps called the Hollowed Peak, and the sky above Drenmore was the deep grey blue of early light, and Corvin did not look back. The Hollowed Peak had no weather at its summit. That was the first thing Corvin noticed. Below, clouds moved, wind cut the lower slopes, but at the top, where the Ash Lords gathered, the air was simply still, the kind of still that came not from calm, but from something old enough to stop the world from bothering it. They were 7. Corvin had known the number from the tablets, but knowing a number and seeing 7 ancient dragons arranged along a ridge the way lesser creatures arranged furniture, with the easy ownership of things that had been there longest, were not the same thing. The smallest of them was twice Verath's length. Their scales had gone dark at the edges, black-tipped and layered like the bark of trees that had survived 100 fires. They watched Corvin and Soot approach the summit with the patience of something that had decided to be curious before it decided anything else. Veldra held position a half-mile back, Verath's wings beating slow, far enough to be seen, not close enough to read as threat. She had said, before they separated, "If you're not back in 2 hours, I'm coming in." Corvin had said, "Give us 3." She had not answered, which he took as agreement. The eldest Ash Lord spoke first. The sound it made was not a roar. It was closer to the sound a mountain might make if mountains had language, resonant, deep, coming from somewhere beneath the ordinary threshold of hearing. One of the scholars had taught Corvin enough Old Draconic to follow the basics. The translation was approximately, a human brings a grayscale to the hollowed peak. We will hear it. Once. Corvin dismounted. He stood on the rock, the wind pulling at his coat, and he looked at 7 dragons so old they had probably watched the first human city get built and made no comment, and he told them the truth. Not a speech, not an argument, the truth in order. He told them about a hall in Drenmore where a councillor pointed at a stable hand as a joke. He told them about a basket with a broken latch and a grey hatchling the size of a cat with uneven breathing and eyes that were steadier than anything had a right to be. He told them about hay and darkness and sitting beside something alive because leaving it alone seemed wrong. He told them about 4 years of reading old books and listening to an old woman who died quietly and left him her library. He told them about Thornwall and Brennan and flying north without permission. He told them about a canyon and a command tent and a dragon that read the battlefield without being asked and burned only what needed burning and no more. He did not tell them Soot was powerful. He told them Soot was himself. Then he said, "You believe the bond makes a dragon less. I am asking you to look at the one behind me and point to what is missing." The Ash Lords looked at Soot. Soot stood on the summit rock without performance. No display, no fire, no raised wings. He stood the way he always stood, completely present, watching, with the quality of something that did not need to prove what it was because it had already decided what it was long ago. The iridescence in his grey scales caught the flat peak light and held it. The eldest Ash Lord looked at him for a long time. Then it spoke in Old Draconic, directed not at Corvin but at Soot. Corvin did not know what it said. He would never know exactly, but Soot answered. The sound Soot made was something Corvin had never heard from him, not the low comfort sound, not the sharp alert tone, not the long exhale before fire. It was older than all of those. A resonance, a shaped thing, the sound of a creature finally speaking in the language it had been born to the audience it had been waiting for. It went on for nearly a minute. The Ash Lords were motionless while it continued. When it stopped, the summit was silent. Corvin looked at the 7 ancient dragons and could not read them. They were too old for the expressions he knew, but the eldest lowered its head. Not a bow, that word was too human for what it was. An acknowledgement, the recognition of one old thing by another, across a gap that should have been unbridgeable. It said something brief in Old Draconic, and then, one by one, the Ash Lords opened their wings. They left, all 7, back into the deep mountains, into the cold above the cloud line, into the places that had no human names. Corvin stood on the empty summit for a long time. Then he turned to Soot and said, "What did you tell them?" Soot looked at him with the steady grey eyes that had not changed since the first night in the hay stall. He pressed his nose briefly to Corvin's shoulder, the same gesture as before, the held contact, the deliberate warmth. Then he turned and walked to the edge of the summit and looked out over the mountains below, and his posture said, as clearly as anything, that it was time to go home. The Ash Lords withdrew their ultimatum. No formal document, no treaty, they simply did not come. The bonded pairs of Drenmore remained. The bonding tradition continued. Councillor Hess formally registered Soot as a first-rank bonded dragon 3 weeks after Corvin returned. He said it retroactively, from the date of bonding, which meant the ledger that had once listed Corvin as stable auxiliary with no dragon on record now listed him as a first-rank rider from the beginning. Hess handed him the document across the desk and said the situation had evolved. Corvin said thank you for Soot's sake and left. Veldra met him at the gate. She said, "They'll write about this, songs probably, statues eventually." Corvin thought about Brennan's handwriting, about the box under the bunk, about an old woman with books tied in twine who said, "You didn't train a dragon, you made a friend." "They'll get it wrong," he said. "They always do," she said, almost smiling. That night he sat in the stable with Soot, in the hay, in the dark that had never really been dark with Soot in it. The same stall, the same stone walls with the black line on them from the first deliberate fire 6 years ago. Outside, Drenmore was a city that had learned, slowly and with difficulty, that greatness did not always look like fire and ceremony. Sometimes it looked like a grey dragon choosing, on his own, to stay.